değerli TÜSİAD üyeleri, değerli konuklar, değerli basın mensupları.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear members of TÜSİAD, welcome back for another Supreme Consultative event. The chair will be opened by the chairman of the Consultation Assembly and chairman of the board. Both of them will be extending their keynote opening remarks. We then will be attending to Professor Klaus Schwab's talk, who's the chairman at the World Economic Forum and the founder, and also the Right Honorable Mr. Oluk Sharma, the chair at COP26. Now for his opening remarks, Mr. Tuncay Özilhan, will you kindly proceed, please? Mr. Chairman, distinguished members of the Assembly, and dear members of TÜSİAD, dear members of the press, welcome back on behalf of the Chairman's Assembly at the Consultation Assembly. I'd like to extend my cordial greetings to everybody. Just like worldwide, the country too is now gaining ground against the pandemic, which is highly gratifying across those countries that have taken up extended vaccination. A return to normalcy has been resumed, and the lockdown restrictions are eased likewise here in Turkey, which feels wonderful because the pandemic has been a cause for misery for all. We've had loss of hope, we've become worrisome and jittery and indignant. However, though, the data clearly suggests that the miseries are not down to the pandemic alone. According to the happiness survey worldwide, there seems to be not a big discrepancy between how happy countries were before and after the pandemic. Those countries that harbor the happiest population worldwide have thankfully managed to stay happy post-pandemic. According to data for 2021 here in Turkey, Turkey is in the lowest fifth quartile, according to the happiness index. More than 50% of the population is disgruntled or unhappy across the country. Ladies and gentlemen, dear members, the biggest indication for well-being is certainly that of how citizens feel. If we're losing hope and conviction for the future, it clearly suggests that things are going in the wrong direction. There may be projects, work for the future, and announcements, but if people aren't happy about it, we need to go back and contemplate what we're doing and for what purpose. Under the pressure of inflation and joblessness, can we expect our peoples to be happy? Our GDP, according to our national output or GDP, we're growing steadily. And as far as monetary expansion and growth in lending is concerned, thankfully, in 2021, in the first quarter of this year too, Turkey has grown in a robust fashion, albeit the growth trajectory has yet to create jobs. By the end of April, those who are able to earn a living here in Turkey are down by 700,000 people, according to 3 years ago. And can we sustain our strong growth performance? We have big question marks or worries. The World Bank has just released another prospect or outlook in terms of recession or steady growth. The biggest record is yet to be broken, and total output worldwide is about to grow at 5.6% worldwide, which is a record over the past 80 years. The biggest countries have been able to generate larger resources, and thanks to vaccination as well as growth or recovery, they were able to lift lockdown restrictions, meaning steady and rampant growth. As far as this positive outlook is concerned, Turkey is decoupled in a negative manner. One of the preliminary indications for growth is PMI, and clearly signaling slowdown for Turkey in terms of growth and lending and growth in the manufacturing industry. Unfortunately, there's more or less a similar propensity. In terms of output, monthly growth has slowed down. down by 1% in the month of April alone. In the remaining of the year, lockdown restrictions will be removed, and there'll be strong comeback across the European continent, which will reassure growth as well as long-term growth in demand. There's 4.5 million without jobs at the moment. So if we can't create new jobs or ways of employment, growth alone will hardly suffice. Those without a job will certainly be very unhappy for being so. But those with a job and pensioners are highly unhappy because of cost of living. Rampant inflation brings down our purchasing power. And those who've left jobs because of the pandemic, they're highly leveraged, and people undoubtedly suffer from loss of welfare. Farmers and SMEs are finding it difficult to pay back. So there may be growth, however, they're not necessarily earning their fair share. That goes to prove that we need to stand in unity. Whenever there are challenges worldwide, we have to confront them hand in hand, but it's becoming even more rigorous to do so. In terms of the economy, there is misery, but there are plenty of youth who are yet to find jobs, who are yet to move out, set up their own households, but they're also disgruntled. For a young generation to be happy and to have a promising future, they have to have access to proper education, and they must have hopes for finding the right jobs for them when they come out of school. And they must also enjoy a set of freedoms and rights and liberties. In terms of schooling, number of teachers around the country and classroom size, Turkey has thankfully come a long way, has been progressive lately. None of that, however, has translated into better quality at a desirable level in terms of education. Because of the pandemic, the teachers have done their best throughout the pandemic, but the pressure has been surmounting on those at school, and it's left an irrevocable damage on them. So many feel that resources will not be good enough in their own country, and a brain drain is inevitable. We're very, very sad to see that many are unfortunately fleeing the country in search of better opportunities outside. Women too suffer from lack of access to equal opportunity. The Istanbul Convention has been abolished, and that used to be a big fight against violence against women. It's just making it very, very hard because 50% of the population are female. And in terms of equal access to opportunity, equal freedoms and rights, and without fighting abuse or exploitation of women, could we hardly create a society that we've all hoped to create. We would like to be part of a society that we're very happy to be a part of, the foundation of which, one of the most biggest foundations of which is secularism. The Republic of Turkey is founded on the essence of secularism. In terms of unity, peace and harmony, secularism has always been pivotal and will remain to be so. So our wellness, our happiness is largely linked to being healthy and also living in a healthy and clean environment. Unfortunately, the sea snot, the viscous sea snot that has been largely accumulating in the Marmara Sea has been a cause for worry because of improper waste management to date. It's clearly evident, and we can't live without protecting our ecosystem any further. Infrastructure must be built with proper due diligence to their eco impact. Otherwise, the results will be irreversible. Whatever or however we grow, we need to do so in an eco-friendly and sustainable manner. We've worked on this as TÜSİAD for a very long time. We have to build on a growth system which is highly eco-friendly and sustainable, that conserves the environment. I'd like to call out to the business community to pollute less, to use E4 effectively and in a sustainable manner, and also to bring down the usage of waste and use of commodity, be circular, and also whatever you do, aspire to conserve the environment. So we've got to be way more or far more eco-friendly. That in itself is not merely romanticism. In the European Union, it's called the Green Deal. And if you were to take a closer look at the Green Deal in terms of growth, there are plenty or myriad opportunities that could be for Turkey. The G7 summit that recently summoned back last week, many or much was deliberated on countries to reduce their carbon emissions, to bring about bigger financial aid and assistance for emerging markets. So it really will not be much of a hindrance for countries like Turkey. If we don't change our perspective in terms of growth, there will be plenty more to suffer from in terms of climate change. And agriculture alone clearly evidences that there will be many rigorous outcomes. Climate change, growth in or increase in temperatures, and the growth in the number and severity of natural disasters have been disastrous. We've seen last year how temperatures have grown severely here in Turkey at a record-breaking level. Can you be a peasant or can you grow a crop under these circumstances? It's like gambling. Cost of fuel has gone up, cost of fertilizers have gone up, and peasants, farmers have been highly leveraged. Unfortunately, they suffer from drought, but peasants nowadays find themselves highly depressed, highly miserable. Agriculture and farming is one of the most strategic businesses for Turkey. So we need policies as soon as possible, urgently, that pay due attention to climate change. The environment is more important than ever. We cannot afford to undergo natural disasters that be of great calamity. And let's not forego the importance of the earthquakes. So more than 70% of the economy, 30% of our national output, 40% of our tax revenues, and 50% of our supply chain is based here in Istanbul. A prospective earthquake could be of a great calamity for Turkey. Now, scholars, NGOs, the federal government, local governments, the business community, all stakeholders have to work hand in hand in great coordination to make sure that there is large preparedness against an imminent large-scale earthquake in terms of telecoms, logistics, finance, energy, banking, as well as food and agriculture, making sure that all of these key industries are highly prepared against an imminent earthquake. So, ladies and gentlemen, dear members, we've got merchants, tradesmen, and largely all members of the business community are faced against rampant inflation, loss of value in the local currency against hard currencies, and an increasing increasing cost in borrowing. They're highly leveraged, and they're finding it hard to pay back in terms of their non-performing loans. Both businessmen and small merchants are highly reflective. So we've not been able to use to our benefit the period, a not inflationary period. So if it were not for the pandemic, we would have earned higher tourism revenues, and there would have been a kind of fewer pressure on our local currency in terms of our balance of payments. And our monetary policy, had it been enforced in a predictable fashion, we would have been able to keep our currency afloat. We would also have been better in terms of our disinflationary policies. So disinflationary policies are not easy for Turkey. Maintaining the value of our local currency has been hard because of what's happening worldwide. Cost of borrowing and cost of supply chain management is growing also in other markets. And because of inflation, you've got bigger countries that maybe not so expansionary in the future, meaning that there could be an interest hike. So we need to be equally stringent in terms of our monetary policy. And we must also clearly not be able to, we will also not be able to bring down our cost of borrowing and interest rates. It also causes a higher cost of living. It means poverty for many with or because of excessive taxation. It brings down our purchasing power. It causes evasion or avoidance of tax. And because of what's happening worldwide, it's also meant depreciation in the value of our currency. So we need, in terms of our foreign affairs, a stable outlook. It's got to be liberal. It must bring down our risk premium, and it must also protect us against the pressure from inflation and interest hikes. In terms of our local currency, appreciation is highly likely in terms of value. And we also expect better performance in terms of disinflationary policies so that interest rates can be reduced. So if there are businesses that overspend, they will go insolvent. If they're excessively leveraged, they can't plow back their earnings or profit. So the same goes for states or countries. They have to plow back their profits into investment. Taxes won't suffice alone in terms of in terms of financing growth. For sustainable growth to happen, we need infrastructure projects that are highly deserved and highly appreciated. We need better education, better distribution or more fair distribution in terms of wealth. And we also need to improve the lives and wellness of individuals in building or creating more jobs, regardless of men or women, who's young, who's old, and whoever is an employer or an employee. We've had to put in a great deal of thought lately into the rule of law and also the complexity and the complicated network of relationships that are not aligned with the rule of law. We've heard about gangsters, loss of ethics in media, loss of ethics in the business community and elsewhere, in and across the community, that has been a source of great big debate. These are ambiguities or dubious statements or hearsays that must be clarified in and around public opinion. So TÜSİAD has been an arch proponent of the fact that if Turkey fails in the rule of law, there will be many severe repercussions. 23 years ago, our former president once said, we need clean politics and a clean environment. Just as in the past, we will always be an arch proponent of the need for clean politics and a clean environment. And it will always serve in building rule of law. So there is a quest for myriad reforms for which we would have to build a brand new foundation. There may be problems or challenges in terms of our democracy. We must not be reactive. We've got to be proactive in offering structural solutions so as to restore credibility into our politics and reassure the society. So instead of having to keep deliberating on democracy and the rule of law, we will then have the opportunity to go into elaborate economy-related issues. I'd like to pay my tributes to the founder of the World Economic Forum, the chairman of the executive committee, Mr. Klaus Schwab, and the Right Honourable chairman of COP26, Mr. Alok Sharma, again, for their kind presence and their contribution. I now would like to extend my most respectful and cordial greetings. A big thank you to Mr. Tuncay Özilhan. I now would like to pass the microphone over to Mr. Simone Kaslowski, the chair at TÜSİAD. Mr. Chairman, dear members of the Assembly and dear members of TÜSİAD, Turkey's business community for industrialists and employers, I'm very happy to be addressing you today. The green light, the light of the end of the tunnel is now apparent thanks to growth and vaccination. And hopefully we'll be back physically for the next gathering. We have with us two very important people, the chairman of the executive committee and founder of the World Forum, Mr. Klaus Schwab, and the Right Honourable Alex Sharma, who's the chair at COP26. In terms of their works to date, the Right Honourable Sharma will be, and Mr. Klaus Sharma will both be inspiring and elucidating us in terms of what's nearing ahead, in terms of future developments. So one of our biggest wealth is our seas and woodlands. And we must maintain them, whatever we do, and conserve them in order to build on their wealth and well-being. For our future, likely, sustainable growth is of great importance, and it has to be our number one priority, whatever we do. The biggest priority for the world has been climate change. In spite of the pandemic, the Western countries have fought against climate change whilst aspiring to meet multiple other goals and objectives, whilst measures are taken to protect the world against climate change. There'll be many economic implications. The biggest kind of resources will go into countries that have circular economy, that are carbon neutral, and that are able to maintain their woodlands and seas in an eco-friendly manner. The biggest unicorn businesses for the future will be into clean technology, clean policies, and also eco-friendly technologies. In the next 15 to 20 years, any country that causes pollution into seas and air will certainly be ostracized out of the global economic domain. So we have to prepare at a planning stage. We must foresee impact assessments. And whenever we need a chat report or an environmental assessment report, it has to be done thoroughly before these investments take place. The very last one of these disasters has been an increase in viscous fluid effluents in the Marmara Sea. Under the President's office, an impact assessment workshop had been set up with close coordination with business community and NGOs and scholars. Otherwise, that workshop or that working committee can hardly prove any fruit. And TÜSİAD will always be there to help support solution generation. We have to protect our woodlands, our seas, our flora and fauna. There's no way we can go back and repair the damage. Ladies and gentlemen, in November, COP26 will convene, and prior to COP26 in November, Turkey becoming a part of the Paris Convention so that we have a carbon neutral roadmap is a very, very meaningful. It's very significant. Our national contribution will be declared, and this roadmap will be the underlying framework for Turkey's contribution. The US has released a package for infrastructure. The G7 is also part of it. So the green economy will be the biggest priority for the years to come. And our biggest trading partner is undoubtedly the European Union. Its growth strategy is driven by the European Green Deal. And it's very, very important and will have major repercussions for our products and services. The customs union will also pay due attention to green transformation. We have to update our customs union with the European Union with due attention to the Green Deal. Both throughout and after the pandemic, we've seen a great deal of financial developments and monetary developments. In the short term, will there be a shock generated by the inflation? It's a question mark. The Fed yesterday has yielded certain signals that there may be a change in monetary policy. The Fed's ruling the other day suggests that our local currency can be highly vulnerable against external impediments. Across the West, expansionary policies had been generated that meant a boost in demand, which also gave and has given us the opportunity to grow our export trade. Have we invested in the growth of our capacity lately? Not at a desired level. So we haven't yet been able to live our potential for growth and exports opportunity. And to better use our potential and the opportunities ahead, we probably don't have enough time. If we've got stable politics and the economy and also stability in terms of jobs creation, we'll be able to bridge the gap and invest in exports. Before we deliberate any further on the economy, I'd like to go back and reinstate one very important factor, a factor that has already been raised, which is the fact that our economy at the moment faces the biggest question, which is lack of governance. The fact that our corporate entities may be emasculated. We need a long-term vision, not a short-term vision. We need to invest in governance and also as much consultation as possible. Lack of governance has a very, very high cost to pay. Day by day, lack of corporate governance is constituting a bigger peril against our judiciary and the appeal of our markets vis-a-vis their international counterparts in the financial community. Legality should never be questionable, and organizations should be able to fulfill their duty. There must never, ever be a loss in meritocracy because it's going to make our ability to restore the economy much, much harder. So, and corporations are just as important to have an effective judiciary. We need transparent politics, which is the biggest priority for effective democracies to function. Political parties are the most important pillar to effective politics. There must not be prohibitions. There must not be shutdowns of political parties. They should be open to function. They must be accountable. They must be highly effective, and they must be highly ethical and abide with rules of code of conduct, all backed up by a legal foundation that meets EU norms and criteria to make our democracy even stronger. Our corporations, our entities have to have higher standards in corporate governance and ethics that's going to raise the bar in many ways. So, ladies and gentlemen, dear members, a short trajectory of the economy is very much to be done in terms of per capita GDP. Back in 2000, it was 18% of OECD in terms of per capita GDP. So with the exception of millennium, there's been growth. By 2013, it was up to 30%. That proportion since 2013 has been declining. By 2020, it was down to 22%. TÜSİAD has done a recent survey according to cost of living and earnings. The highest income earners, unfortunately, have a bigger share. The lowest income earners have diminished their share in total output. So there seems to be diminishing fairness in terms of share of income. And it's quite evident that that proportion is going to be lower this year. Export markets in major destinations are growing, which is a good thing. There's been excessive growth in lending last year, which is still shedding light in terms of our growth ability. Nevertheless, or notwithstanding, it's quite far from our sustainable growth criteria. Composition of growth has completely changed. More of a share in tourism revenues and construction, but lesser so in where we should be growing. we're still kind of lagging behind. For so many years now, we've lost momentum to build on long-term growth, and we've also lost our ability to create more jobs. 25 to 30% is the bigger definition for unemployment. Jobs creation has gone down, and it's almost like a third of the population is currently without a job, which is irreparable. And there's also a bigger, back in 2013, 15%, there was a 15% need for external borrowing in terms of our GDP, which is up to 30% at the moment. And there's been a growth in terms of public spending and the appetite for public borrowing from outside markets. There's also a dichotomy between what's reported in terms of official inflation and what we truly feel. So we feel that there's loss in prosperity. Inflationary expectations have not been governed well. The central bank policies are highly foreseeable, and there's been a lack of thorough consensus, which means loss in pricing stability, or making it more difficult to reach pricing stability. At the end of the day, Turkey is losing momentum because of lack of prosperity. And in terms of shocks, such as COVID or the pandemic, the economy will become not so resilient, and it will also diminish the number of tools that we have in our toolbox for keeping a strong economy. And Turkey will be less effective or less competent compared to many peer markets. So have we got hope? Let's recall the fact that we have lots of reasons to have hope for a promising future. Our economy remains very, very flexible, and so is our young population and our manufacturing background. We've got a huge potential for expansion. Our stakeholders have to join forces, and we have to build on our potential for generating rapid growth. We need political or economic measures that are scientific to give us the resilience that we need. And we must also refrain or avoid steps that could make our politics and economy look bad. If we were to procrastinate, we're going to end up without a promising future. And perhaps the most important of these is education and schooling. According to a very recent report, Turkey, across many OECD countries, is the country that was the second worst in terms of not being able to send school children to school because of lockdown, in terms of the duration of schooling of schools. It's a humongous cost, a humongous burden. The PISA scores back in 2018 were telling us that Turkey was still doing less than the OECD average in terms of our education. And families and students come from different backgrounds. There's a humongous difference between their well-being. Can we make up for that difference? If they can't have access to proper education, could they possibly have hopes for the future? Can they engage in questioning? Can they be inquisitive? Can they engage in critical thinking? And if they've not got proper STEM skills, by the time they grow up, can they be competitive enough with their international peers? Hardly so. Turkey's schooling and education needs inquisitiveness, needs innovation, needs critical thinking, and needs to indoctrinate freedoms, rights, and liberties into our youth segment. One summit that took place very recently deliberated on the future of the North Atlantic Alliance and prospects for collaboration with the European Union, the US, as well as prospects for closer coordination between Washington, D.C. and Moscow. The US President Biden is or has a very promising trajectory, hoping to build on alliances. And the fundamental building blocks for him remain Western values. So geopolitical priorities may conflict with perhaps democratic rights and freedoms, but no more so. They are now to complement each other. The United Kingdom is in a post-Brexit state, and for the first time, it hosted the G7 summit. Being excluded from the North Atlantic Alliance would be of bigger cost for the United Kingdom, and they too have rightly aligned themselves. In Turkey too, with the European Union and the US, have rightly agreed to closely coordinate with each other. It will mean great value for Turkey. We can't afford to be left alone internationally. We have to repair our relationships with our allies and our regional neighboring countries. We have to have a clarification in terms of our dealings with the European Union. We have to constantly aspire for full accession to the European Union. With all of that happening, we will have more rights and freedoms. We will also be more meticulous in building corporate governance, because all of that will be a mandate. If we're excluded from the Western Alliance, we can't possibly hope to reach our aspiration of full accession to the European Union, and we can't repair or maintain an equilibrium between safety, security, liberties, and freedoms. And mind you, as the president reminded, we're past the fifth year anniversary of a largely failed coup attempt that took place a couple of years ago in Turkey. So we need proper corporate governance. Turkey is a founding member of the European Commission. Because Turkey fails to execute the rulings of the European Court, should there be allegations for Turkey in terms of violation, that is unquestionable. Now, the conclusive declaration that came out highlights how to amalgamate all of the above in terms of Western democracies. Now, hostilities and enemies may be defined, but there's been a lot of emphasis on the need to reinforce the North Atlantic Alliance and how freedoms, rights, and liberties are ever more important. These are big commitments for Turkey. Turkey will have to fulfill these commitments because it will be for Turkey's good. It may be a brand new global order, and Turkey will have to fulfill these commitments to remain strong and to remain a strong partner to the North Atlantic Alliance. And also, recent talks with the US President, Mr. Biden, will also kind of bring about opportunity for Turkey to address many of its accumulated problems. Even if NATO troops were to withdraw, will the US forces remain? And what about our troops, their safety and security network? The right circumstances and conditions must be maintained to preserve their well-being. So we want to be reassured. Every single time we meet, there's been a lot of emphasis placed on rights of women. We want Turkey to go back to signing the Istanbul Convention. We would want enforcement and the judiciary to take as many rigorous precautions as possible to protect women. They need equal access to education, employment, and governance, or employment in and across the public sector, especially across public authorities, which is irrevocable to social well-being. So in democracy, in the economy, and in social affairs, we deserve the highest standards possible. Lately, we've had different parts of the community to try and voice their concerns through unseen ways in media. Children and the youth have undergone tough times because of the pandemic. Women used to trust in their rights and freedoms enshrined in the Istanbul Convention. And scholars used to feel highly autonomous. Peasants and farmers were fine in their ecosystem. Businesses and employees continue to fight to do better in terms of their jobs. Whatever we do, we want a nation, and everybody wants a nation with better rights and freedoms. The Marmacy now finds itself in a disaster. We perhaps were to take action late, but now stakeholders have done their best to take timely action to fight against cease not contamination. So we need to join our forces to fulfill our aspiration. We need entities, corporations, rules and enforcement that serve the well-being of our nation and that of our citizens. The grand founder of this nation pointed at reaching higher standards of civilization. And we, whatever we do, will help to serve that. We will serve science as well as continuing to work hand in hand with scholars and pundits and to help elucidate and inspire public opinion and stakeholders. So, ladies and gentlemen, I too would now like to conclude my words. Big thank you to Mr. Schwab, Mr. Sharma, and also my cordial greetings to everybody who's been with us today. Mr. Kaslowski, a big thank you to you too. The very first keynote presenter for today will be Professor Klaus Schwab, who is the founder of the World Economic Forum. And we're very honored to have him with us at our consultation assembly. He's going to tell us how to build an inclusive and resilient economy worldwide.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be again together with the members of TÜSİAD, because I see on the screen here many friends, many partners of the World Economic Forum. And as you know, I have been associated with and close to Turkey since many, many years. I will talk mainly about stakeholder responsibility, but first I want to remind ourselves about the importance of the fourth industrial revolution. You know, I have coined this expression and I have written a book about the fourth industrial revolution, and I'm very pleased to say that we have established, the World Economic Forum has established a network of centers around the world to work together to determine and to define the frameworks, the ethical frameworks, but also the policies around those new technologies. It's very important that we make sure that all those technologies, and I'm speaking of artificial intelligence, blockchain, and so on, are integrated into a global framework which makes sure that those technologies are used in a human-centered and society-friendly way. And I'm very pleased that among the 14 centers we have already established, and our aim is more than 25 centers in a year, that we have, since we have launched in December 2020, our Turkish Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And I want to thank our partners, the Ministry of Industry and Technology, and the Turkish Employers Association for Metal Industries to work together with us in a global network to ensure that those technologies are for the benefit for humankind. I have to say, being myself an engineer and very fascinated by new technologies, if I look again back at my book and I see the description of about 20 technologies, many of those were considered 4 or 5 years ago as science fiction. And of course, also with the pandemic, which accelerated particularly digitalization, but also some of the medical sciences, we are now in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution. And I would say we are not only in the midst, we are already in the midst. We are just at the beginning. Because if I speak to some of our partners and I see what is happening now in synthetic biology, what is happening in outer space technology, what is happening in quantum computing, I would predict that the key to be competitive in the future is to be in the lead of this technological exponential change, or at least to have the capability to follow the progress which is made. Now, if we look at the future, and I have seen in the speeches of Mr. Kaslowski and Mr. Öcalan, and thank you very much for inviting me to be here again part of your discussions. I have seen that we see now the blue skies, or more blue sky on the horizon, also for Turkish industry. And also we see the progress made in vaccination. But let me just make some remarks. One of our members of the board of trustees is the managing director of the IMF, Kristalina, and she, in our last meeting, which we had with our member, she shared, of course, the latest figures of more than 6% global growth for this year and 4.2 estimated for next year. But this growth is very uneven. And it's actually for the first time since many years that industrialized countries may have a higher growth compared to emerging countries. And in addition, there's one thing which strikes me particularly, because in some way it's historical. For the first time, the GDP of Asian countries measured in purchasing power may be higher than the GDP in purchasing power of the rest of the world. I think this is just showing us how much the geopolitical and geo-economic center in the world is moving to the east. Now, one word related to the pandemic. I have at the forum an advisory board of some of the best virologists in the world, and I think we should celebrate that we are moving out in many countries of the, I would say, the hot phase of the pandemic. But nevertheless, I think we have to prepare to live with the pandemic for quite some time. As long as nobody is vaccinated, not all in the world are vaccinated, as Secretary General of the UN, Guterres, told us, nobody will feel safe. And we will have to adapt to maybe new ways. The old normal will not come back. And the virus may become part of our lives. And we have to make sure that, and I come to my first, let's say, imperative, that we become much more resilient in our world. We know the risks. The World Economic Forum is publishing every year a global risk report. And one of the things we learned out of the crisis is to be better prepared for those risks. It's not only the virus, it's also particularly cybersecurity, and I could go, of course, everything which is related to climate change and so on. So we have to be better prepared for surprises for tomorrow. And this is my crucial point, needs public-private cooperation. I will come back to it when I talk about the stakeholder concept. Now, if we want to summarize, what do we have to do? What do we have to change when we come out of this pandemic? I would phrase it in the following way. We have to make sure that we are more resilient, as I just mentioned. we are more inclusive, and we are more sustainable. Now, inclusiveness. We can just not leave anybody behind, nationally and internationally. And key is, if we look what has to be done, key is to provide everybody with a decent job. And to have a decent job means to have the necessary skills. And if we look at some countries, I don't know the figures of Turkey, but if I look at Germany, if I look at the UK, we have nearly as many open jobs today as we have people who still remain unemployed. So there's a mismatch between job requirements and skills. And what the World Economic Forum is doing, we are establishing around the world, we are launching, or we have already established, so-called skills gap accelerators. So what we are doing is that we work together with governments and with business to ensure that there is a common effort to create through education, through on-work, reskilling and upskilling, that we create the talents which we really need for tomorrow. Because tomorrow, the competition, and I come back to the fourth industrial revolution, will be not so much based on low costs. It will be mainly based on the innovative capabilities. And I would say the future, if I would have to coin a phrase, it would be, it's not, the era in which we are living is not anymore capitalism, it's talentism. Because talents are the most important ingredient for corporate success. Capital is easily available, provided you have the right talents. So I'm looking forward to establish soon in Turkey, together with the government and with the business community, a skills gap accelerator, as we have done in other countries. Now, if we talk about inclusiveness, it's not only inclusiveness on a national level, it's inclusiveness on a global level. And the key here is to make sure that those 3.6 billion people who have not yet adequate access to the internet are integrated into the digital world, into the digital economy. For this reason, again, we have started, and I hope we can work together, we have started what we call the Edison Initiative, where we bring together telecom companies, companies in the financial sector related to financial inclusion, companies related to education and to health services, to provide to those in the rural areas who have not yet used the internet in appropriate ways, in productive ways, to provide them a package which is affordable, which is accessible, and which has the right appropriate functionality. So we have to make the world more inclusive, we have to make the world more resilient, and of course, we have to make the world more sustainable. I know that the Honorable Alok Sharma is with us, so I will refrain to talk too much about the environmental issue when we talk about sustainability. And sustainability is not just the environment, it's also plastics, and it's being in harmony with nature again. But I want to thank the Honorable Alok Sharma for all the efforts he is undertaking, some in cooperation with us and with our business community. And here, I'm very happy that about 100 of the most important chief executives around the world wrote a letter to the G7 encouraging the leaders, the political leaders, to be even more bold and to promise the necessary support of the business community in achieving our carbon zero goals, but not just in the long horizon of 2050, but to make considerable progress by 2030. Now, this brings me to the real topic of my speech, which is the stakeholder concept. You may know I have written recently a book on stakeholder capitalism, and I coined, let's say, this word stakeholder capitalism first time 50 years ago. And the forum, the World Economic Forum, is actually based on the concept of promoting stakeholder responsibility. But when we talk about stakeholder responsibility, and now everybody talks about it, it's only credible if it's also measurable. So what we have done is our International Business Council, and I'm very happy that Koch Holding is a very important member of this council, has taken the decision to develop a metric system together with the 4 big audit companies in the world, in order to as President Biden mentioned yesterday in a different context, the proof is in the pudding, which means we have to accept also not to be measured on our ESG performance, on our environmental, social responsibility and good governance performance. So we have developed this system, and the idea is now to make the system, those metrics, globally accepted and to develop a global standards. And in order to do so, I'm pleased to say that we are working together with now with the standard setting organizations around the world, with the government organizations, in order to create a global framework. Particularly, our partner here is the IFRS, that we have an integrated framework for measuring what companies are doing for prosperity, which means to create profits and to create wealth, but also what they are doing for people and society and what they are doing for the planet. And I hope that we can integrate many companies from Turkey in this common effort, because the winds have changed. It took me nearly a 50 years battle against Milton Friedman and the shareholder concept to show that at the end, capitalism and free enterprise will only survive if companies have a purpose which goes beyond making profits and being economically successful. Because enterprises are not just economic units, but they are very important organisms of our society. And let me conclude. One last conclusion which we take out of the pandemic is the importance of public-private cooperation. All those issues which we have on the horizon cannot be addressed by governments alone. Look at environment, at the environmental challenge. We need the innovative force and capabilities of business. We need also civil society, because if we want to succeed, it needs also a change in our lifestyles. So we are all together in the same boat, and we at the World Economic Forum, we invite you to be part of the many initiatives, and I thank again TÜSİAD and Mr. Kaslowski and Mr. Özelhal for giving me this opportunity to bring into your discussions a global perspective and also a voice which you all share, which is very committed that not only to the ESGs, to stakeholder capitalism, but really to have business serving society and serving our planet. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schwab. Professor Schwab'a çok teşekkür ediyoruz.
Thank you very much, Professor Schwab. Today we have another very important guest, the Right Honorable Alok Sharma, the president of COP26. He is right now in Ankara visiting us, and the fight against global climate change is one of the most important topics, and the next conference is going to take in November in Glasgow.
Thank you very much, and thank you to TÜSİAD for inviting me, and of course for that very insightful speech from Professor Schwab. Good morning, friends, to all of you from Ankara. We arrived here yesterday evening, and it's great to be here in Turkey. You will know that earlier this year, Simone Kaslowski said that the color of the future is clear, and that color is green. And the signs of this are everywhere. We now are in a position where 70% of the global economy is covered by a net zero emissions target. And indeed, the entire G7 nations have now got emission targets for 2030 that put them on a path to net zero by 2050. And the G7 has also committed to end international finance for coal power, which is now more expensive than solar and wind power in the majority of the world. Renewables prices are falling faster than anyone expected, and renewable investments are creating more jobs than their fossil fuel equivalents. The reality is that we are unmistakably moving towards a green future. And it is a future where we create jobs and we create prosperity without harming the planet. Quite frankly, there is no choice to be made between cleaning up our environment and growing our economies. We can do both, and we can do them at the same time, and that has been our experience in the United Kingdom. Over the past 30 years, we have managed to grow our economy by around 78%. At the same time, we have cut emissions by around 44%. So green growth is absolutely possible. And over the next 10 years, in the UK, we are aiming for our economy to support 2 million green jobs. As I say, the green transition is definitely well underway, but the reality is that unfortunately it is not moving fast enough. And so we must speed this up if we're going to protect our precious planet. You'll all know that in 2015, the countries of the world signed the historic Paris Agreement. This was an international deal to tackle the threat of climate change, and countries, leaders committed to do everything they could to limit global temperature rises to below 2 degrees and closer to 1.5 degrees. Because the science has been very clear, is that by doing so, this would avoid the very worst effects of climate change, which all of us see around the world, wherever we may be based. But unfortunately, since the Paris Agreement was signed, the world has not done nearly enough to cut emissions. And now, if we are going to keep that 1.5 degree limit within reach, to keep that 1.5 degree limit alive, we must halve global emissions by 2030 and then reach net zero by the middle of the century. And what does all this mean? This means that we have to take action now and collectively. So COP26, the next United Nations Climate Conference, which we are holding in Glasgow in November, this must be the moment that we all take responsibility to protect our planet and keep the 1.5 degrees limit alive. And to achieve this, the UK COP26 presidency is pushing for action on 4 key goals. Firstly, to put the world on a path to driving down emissions until they reach net zero by the middle of the century. And of course, we are urging countries to set out their net zero targets and at the same time come forward with 2030 emissions reduction targets to take them there. And of course, as part of that, also set out policies that are going to deliver this, like phasing out coal, so that these targets are not just an ambition, but they also point the way to action and to reality of delivery. Secondly, we're aiming to protect people and nature from the effects of climate change. Our third goal is to get finance flowing to climate action, and really importantly, both public finance, but also private finance. In this respect, I can tell you that the UK government was very pleased to launch an initiative called the Climate Finance Accelerator Program last week here in Turkey, and we are using public money to help mobilize private finance for climate action, to use that leverage effect that we see around the world. We want to ensure that that happens in countries everywhere. And finally, our fourth goal is to work together, encouraging cooperation across borders and across society to keep the 1.5-degree limit in reach. And that, of course, very much includes bringing business and investors in behind our COP26 goals. And I have to say to you that the role that you as business leaders play is going to be absolutely vital if we're going to keep 1.5 degrees alive. And this is not only because the transition to a clean future requires change across the real economy, but actually because governments need to know that the climate action, the policies they put in place will be welcomed rather than resisted by business. And this has been certainly my experience as our business minister over the last year in the United Kingdom. It is so vital that we get business and government working hand in hand. So we're asking all companies and investors to make a solid commitment to themselves reach net zero emissions by 2050 at the latest by joining the Race to Zero campaign. This, as many of you will know, is a United Nations campaign that commits you to reach net zero emissions by 2050 at the latest and to short-term targets to get there. And these targets need to be based on science, so that net zero is not just some vague aspiration, but actually a concrete plan set out by every party. Financial institutions can join the equivalent of Race to Zero. It's called the Glasgow Finance Alliance for Net Zero. And our friends at TÜSİAD have the details for both of these initiatives. And I do believe that if businesses join this, it makes a very, very clear statement from them that they can see the possibilities presented by our green future and that they're determined to take those opportunities. And ultimately, it also shows your customers and your investors that you are absolutely serious about climate action and tackling climate change. I can tell you that financial firms, which are responsible for assets in excess of $70 trillion, are now signed up to the Glasgow Finance Alliance for Net Zero. And this includes global asset managers who are responsible for $37 trillion worth of assets. And that represents around 40% of the global industry right now. We also have well over 2,000 companies representing around 15% of the global economy, which have joined the Race to Zero campaign. But unfortunately, we've got very few firms here in Turkey who are on board. And that's why my plea to you is please join and help us to build on the movement towards green finance and cleaner ways of working that, frankly, we're already seeing businesses and the banking sector adopt in Turkey. So joining, I think, is just going to amplify what is already happening. On the 8th of July, the UK government and TÜSİAD are holding a Race to Zero summit. And this is a really excellent way to explore COP26 and, of course, also the Race to Zero membership. And I would kindly ask all of you, encourage all of you to attend this event. Because ultimately, Race to Zero is, and membership of this campaign isn't just about being good for the planet. It is also about being good for business, it's about being good for the bottom line. The world is moving to a clean economy, and frankly, those who do not act are going to risk getting left behind. And we have analysis to demonstrate that together, 215 of the world's biggest companies have got almost $1 trillion at risk from climate impacts. But actually, if you look at those same companies and you look at the potential that they have, if they take the right actions for gains from climate action, we're talking about $2 trillion. This is what we're talking about, the positive move towards a green economy can deliver for individual businesses as well as global economies. And of course, here in Turkey, where exports to the European Union are so important, EU action on climate change heralds new and economic opportunities for businesses particularly, and early action is going to be absolutely vital to establish Turkey as the low carbon manufacturing hub for Europe and beyond. And I know from the conversations that I have had, and I know I will find this out further in the conversations I have later on today, that business is highly respected within the Turkish government. And so what I would do is urge you to continue to express your support for ambitious climate action to the government. And I know that TÜSİAD is already doing some fantastic work here in terms of their representation. So please, collectively, individually, make clear to the government, to the officials, the ministers that you talk to, that business is behind ratification of the Paris Agreement, and that net zero and 2030 climate targets help to provide clarity and confidence to markets and to investors. And this is, as I said, certainly been our experience from the UK, where targets have helped to grow our clean industries. And this is an example, not just in the UK, but one can look at from around the world, where businesses stepping up, saying they want to see action, working with governments does deliver clean growth. And so please keep talking about the fact that the future of the global economy is green, and that COP26 is a chance, our chance collectively, to shape that future. I sincerely believe that if all of us work together, and that's government, that's business, that's investors, that's civil society, we can accelerate the move to a green global economy. And we can help to create jobs and prosperity, whilst at the same time protecting our precious planet. Thank you for everything that you're doing, and I look forward to our continuing cooperation with our friends in business in Turkey, and of course with our friends in TÜSİAD. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sharma. Tüm konuşmacılarımıza içtenlikle teşekkür ediyoruz.
A big thank you, heartfelt thank you remarks to all of those who've presented this morning. I now would like to move on to the consultation part with our members.